Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Toronto Debating Society. Tonight is May 25th, 2010. This is our last meeting of the 2009-2010 season. Arguing whether or not Canada should be a republic, with points of information accepted. On the government side, we have Adrian as the Prime Minister. Without ado, I would like to introduce you to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The resolution before the House today is Canada should be a republic. The definition is defined, the resolution is defined as follows. Canada is defined as a group of provinces and territories as stated by the Constitution Act of 1867. Should be is defined as advisable or prudent. A is defined as 1. Republic is defined as a state with a prime minister and a president. The government has 3 main points in support of the resolution. The first point in support of the resolution. The first point is that it will enhance democracy. The second point is that it will solve some of the problems of detachment of the monarchy from Canada. And the third point is our Canadian identity. On to the first point, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister can appoint federal judges, Supreme Court justices, senators, members of federal boards, commissions, and agencies, cabinet ministers, ambassadors, and lieutenant governors, among other people. Under the current system, the monarch, through the Governor General, rubber stamps all appointments. Consequently, there's no imperative for the Prime Minister to pick good choices, qualified people, non-political or non-partisan hacks. The prorogation crisis of 2010 is a prime example of what happens when a Prime Minister has too much power and there's no one who can provide the necessary checks and balances to the use of power. But why does this happen? It happens because the monarchy is not elected. There's no power base, there's no democratic legitimacy. The public and the population at large have not been involved in her selection. And because of this fact, she does not intervene, and the monarch knows this as well. For example, the last time a British monarch vetoed a law which was bad for the population was in 1707, more than 300 years ago. The Queen and the monarchy know that in a modern democracy, she must yield to her democratic advisors. And yet, at the same time, and my member will be talking about this, they advocate political options which they have no business advocating because they were not elected to anything. Some might say having a Governor General is ample enough. In perilous times, the Governor General, who represents the monarch, can step in. The only flaw with this logic is that the Governor General is appointed by the Prime Minister and can be removed by the Prime Minister if the Prime Minister feels is accurate. This flies in the face of democracy and proves once again that when push comes to shove, the Governor General, the representative of the monarch, is relatively toothless. Our system is crying out for someone who can keep a Prime Minister in check, who can blunt the tyrannical and almost dictatorial powers that a Prime Minister can accrue if he or she decides to abuse them. We want someone who is there to represent the people, for the people, as opposed to a Prime Minister who is only in it for him or herself. The monarchy and her representatives are incapable of providing that because they lack the democratic authority from the Canadian people to do so. For that reason, we believe that the monarchy needs to go, and it must be replaced by a president who is elected by the people and has a democratic muscle to rein in a rogue Prime Minister. I'll take a point of information from the member.
Aren't Prime Ministers elected by the people?
Prime Ministers are elected by the people, but then they don't have to listen to the people for 5 years. It's an elected dictatorship.
We live in a dictatorship?
Figuratively speaking, we do. But continuing on, our second reason is detachment of the monarchy in relation to Canada. The monarch has no first-hand knowledge of local customs, rules, mores, or culture. She's from a foreign land, and when push comes to shove, she is a foreigner. She is too distant and too far removed from the life and times of Canada and Canadians. Her Majesty the Queen, for example, is also the Queen of Australia, New Zealand, Jamaica, Barbados, the United Kingdom, the Bahamas, Papua New Guinea, and several other countries. The government believes that someone in charge of our political system, someone who is our head of state, is someone who should embody the diversity of Canada and who can identify with the concerns of Canada and dedicate it to Canadian concerns alone. who is a Canadian citizen and who is vested with the interest of seeing this country succeed. The monarchy and the monarch is not that institution, and it's not that person. And finally, our third point is Canadian identity. The monarch is born into the role, and that is the only qualification the monarch has for being such an important part of our political system. As a maturing country, we need to form our own traditions, institutions with a distinctly Canadian flair and design, occupied by Canadians. We have a great enriched tradition of 3 founding peoples: English, French, and Native Canadians. And it's time that our institutions from the very top to the very bottom recognize and adapt to these facts. We are now a modern, diverse, and pluralistic society bolstered by immigrants. Society has changed, and there's nothing wrong with our institutions changing with it. And change does happen. In the past, only men were allowed to vote, and that has changed as society has changed. In the past, only white Anglo-Saxon Protestants were allowed to immigrate to this country, and that too has changed. And even in the recent past, stores were not even allowed to be open on a Sunday, and that has changed as well. The government point is that as time goes on, there are certain traditions that need to be changed, there are certain institutions that need to be changed. And the people agree. A clear majority of polls taken October 1st, 2007, October 27, 2009, all say over 50% that the monarchy needs to go. And we won't return into the United States. Israel, Germany, Pakistan, Ireland, India all have a president and a prime minister, and they have all retained their unique individual cultural emphasis. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, we can do better. In conclusion, we would urge that the House support the resolution that Canada should be a republic. It is better for our democratic institutions, it is better for our Canadian identity, and it will remove the detachment and the remoteness that our monarchy currently has. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Now speaking to oppose the motion, the Leader of the Opposition, Gerry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honored opponents, ladies and gentlemen. Just before I start, it occurred to me while I was sitting there that would we be holding a parliamentary debate if we were a republic? I have to think about that one. The Prime Minister made a couple of statements that I would like to oppose. He spoke about detachment. Yes, the Queen lives in England. She does not live in Canada. She is the monarch, but it is the crown that has the power, the crown. And the crown's representatives are the 10 lieutenant governors and the Governor General, all of who are Canadians and live in Canada. So there is no detachment on their part. They are in Canada, they know what is happening in Canada, and they represent the crown in Canada. So that's to the detachment. He also talked about identity. He talked about forming our own traditions. Well, I don't think you can form traditions. I think traditions are things that happen over hundreds and hundreds of years. And yes, our culture evolves, but you don't set out to make that happen. Our traditions are hundreds of years old, and they are based in our history. And our history is based with the English and with the French beginnings of Canada. So I would tend to differ about Canada's identity, yes.
The English had a tradition of slavery. How do we know a good tradition from a bad one?
I think that a tradition such as slavery, which was a historical tradition based on the need for the people in the colonies, for workers, that died out when the times changed and when the political will of the people changed it. I have three arguments that I would like to put forth. One is based on the Crown, the second is based on the will of the people, and the third has to do with maturity. First of all, the Crown. The Crown, which is, most people think of as the Queen, but the Crown is the actual technical term for the power that we look to from England. The Crown gives the core of our executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the Canadian government. All of our governmental functions come from the ideas that we have garnished from Canada, or from England, I'm sorry. Royal assent and the royal signature is needed to enact the law, but the authority comes from the Canadian populace. The Crown's participation is very limited. The primary function of the Crown today is to act as a guarantor of a continuous and stable governance, and as a non-partisan safeguard against the abuse of power. And that's a quotation. Every government needs, not now please, every government should have a safeguard. Our safeguard is the Crown, and it's a non-partisan, non-Canadian, I will grant you, but a non-partisan situation that can look after and safeguard our political system. A quotation that comes from David Smith in The Invisible Crown. He said that the Crown is an integral part of a practical form of government, and as such it has a direct and substantive part to play in the lives of all Canadians. The Crown and its portion of our governmental branches has been here since 1867, and it is a firm part of our political system. My second point has to do with the will of the people. I know that the Prime Minister talked about some polls. I, in fact, have looked at a number of polls as well. Most of the polls taken in the last 20 years favor the monarchy over the Republican form of government by an average of 10% higher. An ECOS poll of 2002 believed by 55% to 30% that the monarchy does keep us distinct from the United States, and that alone, in those people's eyes, was good enough reason to keep it. The Ipsos Reid poll of 2002 found that 70% of the people surveyed supported the idea of a constitutional monarchy. Peter Donolo found that, and his quotation was, "People only care on Canada Day and Victoria Day." I'm not sure why, but most people are pretty complacent and are happy with the status quo. Andrew Coyne, speaking in Maclean's, wrote in 1995 that the debate is ultimately futile given the monarchy's place in Canada's constitution. My third argument has to do with maturity. 1 minute? Thank you. Canada as a constitutional monarchy works very well. The British monarchy has lasted over 1,000 years. It's a very mature system. At the same time, Canada's democratic government is also quite old. Only 3 countries in the world have older democracies. So we have a constitutional monarchy, or a constitutional monarchy in Canada based on the British monarchy of 1,000 years. We have a democracy that is very old. They both work very, very well together. Why would you want to change something that seems to be working very, very well? I'm not a monarchist, but I like Canada going along the way it is, and that is with the backing of Great Britain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leader of the Opposition. Now returning to support the government, I'd like to introduce the seconder for the government.
I'd like to quote Dennis the peasant. "Listen, strange women lying around in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not some farcical aquatic ceremony. You can't expect to wield supreme power just because some watery tart threw a sword at you. So, our monarchy in theory goes back 1,000 years. This is sort of back to the age of King Arthur, who got the job because some watery tart threw a sword at him. And whether that's really the way that one derives legitimacy is a question. And even if you don't go with the mythical origins, the fact is that monarchs around the world are there because someone took power undemocratically. So the question here is, does it make sense for Canada to keep the monarchy, or should it be a republic? And we argue that it should be a republic. The Governor General, the Queen's representative, there's some contradictory information from the opposition there. Either she has the role of being able to do things to stop undemocratic behavior in government, she's a check on the Prime Minister, or she has no power and she rubber stamps everything because everything really comes from the will of the people. Either way, they're kind of weak arguments, and when they're both presented by the opposition as legitimate reasons for why the Crown is a good part of an actual functioning government, I have a hard time with that. The political will of the people has changed traditions over the years and is changing this one. For example, ending slavery, women's suffrage, gay marriage, derived from the will of the people. And the will of the people is trending towards getting rid of the monarchy if you look at the age breakout of the polls. Yes?
Did all of those things happen in Canada since 1867, when we were a constitutional monarchy, correct? The women getting the vote, women being allowed to come into town, Catholics being allowed to run around free, apparently peasant watery tarts allowed to roam in the streets.
Yes, I got to your point. The point there, though, is a correlation, not a causation. It didn't happen because of the Crown, it happened in spite of the Crown. So what is happening there is just because just because the Crown's been around for certain events doesn't mean that it positively influenced events. And in fact has generally not had a positive influence by looking at the abdication of a monarch because of sympathies with the Nazis, for example, is a real question. Yes?
Is that an assumption? Let's go back to the topic about the watery tarts walking around the street. That's an assumption about the causation or the escalation.
Is there a question in there? No question. All right, moving on. So I have some things that I'd like to point out. So there's this idea that all the governmental positions are due to royal assent. Again, it's like, is it due to royal assent, or is it due to the will of the people? When we're arguing that it's a good check on undemocratic behavior, we say, yes, the Crown has this power. When we are fearing the fact that itself the Crown is undemocratic, we're like, well, it's not all that powerful after all, really. It's more like symbolic and, pretty. So there's a real question there about this sort of guarantor of stability and freedom and all of those good things, because depending on what the argument of the moment is, monarchists will argue that she's either weak or all-powerful. In terms of the nonpartisan can rise above, unite everybody, first of all, anybody who's not actually born into the royal family cannot be a monarch, and that's just there. So it's not truly representative of a meritocracy. But the monarchy and the Crown have been involved in politics, whether you look at, for example, Prince Charles's involvement in trying to convince the National Health Service to use quackery for its patients, or whether you're looking at the Governor General and her sympathies towards separatists in Quebec. These are not people who are above policy, and in fact use their position to try to influence policy. So I don't see where that actually hacks either. So what I'm going to say here is that if we want a truly democratic meritocracy, then what we need to do is have elected positions, including the head of state, who can be represented by any Canadian of true merit, and who can truly act as a real constitutional check or balance against the PM. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seconder for the introduce the seconder for the opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, the member of the government who's razzled and dazzled us with her big vocabulary, but what she's very, very confused, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just here to bring a little bit of clarity to the whole situation. Yes, I say clarity. Yes, I realize that's, liberal, and yes, I realize I might be accused of being a separatist or a federalist or something or other. But don't be confused. Clarity is the name of the game. So, let's look at, first off, the main arguments that let's start off with the question why. Why do we have to change the way things are? And this goes to what the leader of the opposition said. What is so wrong with the status quo? I fail to see, the government failed to convince me what is so wrong with what's actually happening out there. There was a lot of confusion. What hyperbole is out there, what monarchists believe, what Republicans believe, what the people believe, and what is actual reality. The actual reality is the monarchy exists to oversee what's happening in Canada. It's a constitutional monarchy where we live, constitutional monarchy. We elect the Prime Minister. He represents our people, not right now. He represents us, and we have a monarchy that oversees what happens. That brings a level of decorum. Have you ever seen what happens in question period? It is a raucous, it is embarrassing to watch that channel. The monarchy brings a level of decorum, a level of procedure, and that's what we need. That's what every country needs. That the English monarchy, the crown oversees over 16 countries in the world. They represent the people, the will of the people, maturity, continuity, and there's nothing wrong with that. It has worked, it is continuing to work. Let's look at our arguments that have been presented. So, enhanced democracy, PM, the Senate appointment, the Governor General rubber stamps, they really don't rubber stamp. The Governor General is recommended by the Prime Minister, some argue appointed, but she's actually appointed by the Queen. Not right now. She's appointed by the Queen, and so in that sense, she doesn't the Prime Minister. If the government argues that the Prime Minister represents the people, and the Prime Minister recommends a Governor General or a Lieutenant Governor, they're representing the people, are they not? And the monarchy, the crown, represents a continuity to hold dear our Canadian values. Very assumptive. Lots of assumptions coming out of the government to assume that a man does not represent a woman, or somebody with an English background does not represent somebody with a French background. That's loaded with assumptions, and I would challenge all of them off the bat. Because she's a foreigner, which leads into the second point. Because the Queen is a foreigner, she does not understand what's going on. I would argue that our treasurer of the club for next year is a foreigner by that same definition, so therefore he should not be allowed to handle Canadian money. I'm so sorry, because that's what our government says. Yes, I'll take your question.
I just want to clarify, so the unelected crown can overturn what the elected representative chooses for a Governor General. Is
I
that
did
correct?
not say that they could overturn it. Moving on to number 3, the Canadian identity. Sorry,
Can they?
I did not answer one way or another. We're moving on to the
I
Canadian
noticed that.
identity. The monarchy is born into the role which is distinctive. Yes, the monarchy is born into the role. The crown is born into the role. Our Governor General is not born into the role, ladies and gentlemen. So if we look at some of the facts that have been raised by my colleague, the leader of the opposition, the Crown forms the core of the executive, the legislative, and judicial branches of the Canadian government. The argument number 2 represents, the government represents the will of the people. We have lots of quotations to support that, lots of polls that have been taken. I would like to point in one argument that has not been raised, and that is the cost. The cost that we pay to the Queen right now, and I've noticed the government stay clear of that. We can't just walk in and change the way Canada is run. It's built into the Constitution, for one thing, to have a constitutional monarchy. But if we so decide, if the Prime Minister is, wheeling and dealing there, decides he wants to do that, he can't just walk out and say, we're doing this, end of story, banging the gavel like they like to do. They have to hold referendums. Referendums are extremely, extremely expensive. We are looking at the 1980 Quebec referendum cost over $5 million, and that's just in $1980, and that's just Quebec. Spread that across Canada in 2011, we're looking at a lot of moolah. Does the government really want to do that? I don't think so. They will not be around to see the outcome of that because we will vote them out. We will be in, and we say stick with the constitutional monarchy. Ladies and gentlemen, the monarchy works, the constitutional constitutional monarchy is good. Please vote.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the argumentative portion of the debate, and now I would like to invite the Leader of the Opposition back to provide a summation for his position.
All right, I've heard a lot of stuff back and forth, and I just want to go over my main 3 points, and we stick with those. The Crown acts as a guarantor of continuous and stable government. We have had continuous and relatively stable government since 1867. This is because of our position as a constitutional monarchy. Number 2, the will of the people. As I said before, most polls favor Canada staying as a monarchy, as a constitutional monarchy, rather than becoming a republic. Over 70% of Canadians in several polls favor the status quo. That's the main thing that Canadians want. They don't want anything changing. They like the way Canada is. And Canada is a constitutional monarchy. Why would we go to something different when we have something that is really, really good, that people all over the world would love to have? We've got it. Why change it? Number 3, Canada has a very mature government system. Yes, we are based on the British system of government. And we have a very old democracy. As I said before, the 3rd oldest in the world. It works. Why change it? As I said, people want the status quo. We don't want to change and maybe have something worse. Why would we want to roll the dice when we've got a sure thing going? Ladies and gentlemen, Canada should remain as a constitutional monarchy.
And as our final speaker, I would like to re-invite our Prime Minister to summarize and conclude the debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a lot from the opposition about the status quo. We've heard a lot about from the opposition about change and how change is a bad thing. We've heard a lot about the opposition about why should we change something which apparently works. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, Mr. Speaker, change is done so that we can improve something. Change is done so that we can make it better. Change is something because the status quo isn't good enough. The monarchy, the resolution as we've described it, as we've defined it, change is our only option. As well, the opposition has also said something along the lines that, well, it's tradition and the will of the people and it's going to cost too much money, and they've thrown a lot of red herrings out there. But democracy deserves to flourish. Democracy deserves to be allowed to grow. But to summarize our main points, the abolition of the monarchy will enhance democracy. The abolition of the monarchy will ensure that our head of state is someone who can relate to Canadians, someone who is a Canadian, someone who can know what Canadians feel and how Canadians relate to the many, many, many issues that are at hand. And finally, the abolition of the monarchy will allow Canada to grow and to mature because it is a tradition, but traditions die, traditions end, because they are bad traditions. And we shouldn't be afraid to end a bad tradition. For all these reasons, we beg the House to support the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. At this point, I would now like to introduce our adjudicator for the scene, who will be rendering his verdict for the debate.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to do some things a little different than the way I normally do and actually make sense when I do an adjudication, as opposed to what generally happens. things were fairly clear tonight, which was good. It's a fairly straightforward topic. Canada should be a republic. And as far as the government's definition goes, the definition was again pretty straightforward. Constitutional Act of 1867 being Canada, should be advisable or prudent, and republic, state with prime minister and president. So the arguments that were put forward, and I missed the second one for a bit and then caught up with it because they were sort of mixed in, and that's not a criticism, it's just in my head they were all mixed up. It was well defined. Reasons: enhanced democracy, the issue of detachment of the monarchy politically, and the issue of Canadian identity, and why it should be a republic. So the points came out, and I think there was good back and forth. I just want to say that right up front, that there was good debate. The points of information were actually quite entertaining and almost nasty, but not quite that. Verging on that, I've seen a similar situation that got very feisty at one point, and it's good. It gets people active, and I guess it gets you as an audience at least awake, if nothing else, especially when you're dealing with a potentially dry topic like politics and republics. I didn't hear what you commented on as far as the debate topic while I was out, but it did appear to be animated from the hands and the voices that I heard. Anyway, enhancing democracy, the issue of Prime Minister appointing many people in government, the whole issue of the proroguing of Parliament, and how the Governor General is weak, and that's not a good thing for Canadians. The fact that the Governor General was appointed, and it shouldn't be, it's not a democratic situation. The Prime Minister gets to pick and choose. Generally, it's supposed to be on the advice of council, but nonetheless. And then an argument that the Prime Minister is in it for him or herself and in need control by a president to help temper the power that the Prime Minister wields in Canada. The second argument, that the monarch is too distant both geographically and also managing so many other countries around the world. She, in this case, doesn't have any time to really deal with Canada, so we should go to a Republican system to enhance the democratic representation of the Canadian people. Thirdly, Canadian identity. The monarch is born into the role. Canada, promoting diversity, should encourage people to take part in the political system, and that would happen through a republic system. And an argument that people say that the monarchy should go. Now, I just want to point out that the argument by the government was 50% of people in polls said that the monarchy should go. And the opposition said that there's a poll that said 70% of people in polls said the monarchy should stay. So I figure immigration, if nothing else, is doing good because it's bringing 120% of the people into Canada. People vote that way. So whether it should be a republic or not, at least keep immigration flow into Canada. I don't know where the statistics came from, but it was entertaining anyway to listen to that. So the one thing that I will criticize the government about, other than mentioning the president one more time, it wasn't there. In reference to India, Pakistan, Israel, and other countries that use a similar system, there wasn't really what's the benefit of a president. As to why would the president control, and okay, in Israel, the president does this, and this happened here, and the president said, no, we can't do this, and the people were happy, and they lived, in a great wondrous land. That kind of a thing to say, okay, here's the benefit. That's why we should be a republic. The opposition didn't really pick up on that either, and say, well, what's the deal with the president? Big deal. They have a hard enough time running that little republic, the Republic of the United States, as it were, and can you imagine throwing a prime minister in there as well? Holy cow, too crazy. Anyway, one of the short arguments there. The opposition did come back and address two of the issues and said, no, the Queen isn't in Canada, but the representative is there, and that person is the person that you need to talk to. It's not the Queen. She's the one that does technically represent, but the Governor General does. And one way to stress that would have been the whole King Byng affair. The issue that came up was, let me just find it quickly here. I misplaced it, but the issue of prorogation, that was the issue that was brought up, was prorogation. And the King Byng affair could have been an issue to say, well, look, we had a representative who said to the Prime Minister, get back at it. Don't start dissolving Parliament, do your job and work at it. And it didn't happen in this case, but that could have been something that said, well, look, here, had the Governor General done her job, whether or not she did, that doesn't matter. Your argument is she should have done her job and said, get back in there and start doing it. Don't cancel Parliament. That's the issue. The argument back would have been, well, yeah, okay, so we wasted 4 months in a threat of a political election, et cetera, et cetera. So the debate, again, just to keep the debate going, as to why not get arguments on both sides. The other issue, traditions. That, in fact, it was basis in French and English, and they did develop over time. They weren't formed, but they did develop through the growth of the country since 1867 and even before that. To your points, the Crown is a power looked to in England, and it is the basis of the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branches of Parliament. Royal assent is needed, but again, it's a Canadian who does it. And yes, she happens to be from Haiti, but nonetheless, she's Canadian, and that's the issue that you would raise, and you did. Also represents the will of the people, and the argument was again raised, well, what's the will of the people? The will of the people is actually known. In fact, we want to do stuff without being told by some queen over in some far-off land. And people say we want to change, in this case too, as raised by you, our traditions. The issue of slavery that was brought up as well. And I'll address that in a quick second because that was a good point. The issue, third one was maturity. Monarchy is 1,000+ years old. Canada has an old democrat, a parliamentary democracy as well, a constitutional monarchy democracy. And why change it? And it's a great question. Why change it? But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's a simple question, but nonetheless it puts doubt in the government's case saying, you're causing all these problems, it's worked for this long. Now, points of information, I just want to bring those up. There were several raised. Michelle raised them to Adrian. Prime Minister is elected by the people. It's a dictatorship, though it doesn't work. And the comment, well, it was figuratively, it's a dictatorship technically, but it's not. And that's fine, because as a republic, you'd have to answer to the people as such. That was your basic point. Margie brought up the issue about slavery and how do we determine what is a good and a bad tradition, which was really good, and in fact it changed over time because the will of the people said change it, and that was it. 2 refusals, one from the government and the opposition for answering questions that might have been a time constraint, but nonetheless it's good to try to take them as well, although it was difficult to stay focused, sort of with all this stuff swirling around, so I appreciate your focus on that. The 2 good points as well, the issue of changes happening after the democratic monarchy, about the issue that women got the vote and slavery was abolished in Canada after the whole thing came up, so it raised a good question. And the watery tart was brought up about the basis of King Arthur. I was giggling as you were talking about that, thinking, yes, here comes the sword out of the lake, and the lady says, you're the king, well, good for you, and it's sort of, wow, that's great, like you won the lottery, King Arthur, good job. And then you think of Monty Python, there's a little appropriate shells going off, but nonetheless, it was good. Then the issue between the 2 members of opposition and government, the issue of questioning. A couple of questions that were refused, and then the issue that was sort of half answered, and then it was sort of, okay, I'm done. I don't want to talk to you anymore. So I sort of counted down the member of opposition for that, because it wasn't really an answer to that whole thing, but nonetheless, that was fine. Back to the opposition, the government seconder, the issue again brought up of the fact that monarchs took power undemocratically. So right there, ironically, here you're saying it's a parliamentary democracy, and yet you're looking at something that was taken by force without the will of the people, just one person saying, I want power. Political will changes the status quo. Again, the issue of slavery and suffrage, gay marriage, that I brought up earlier with the back and forth. And that the monarchy is not technically representative. It's a single family, a single person as well. And the influence of Prince Charles the Governor General in Quebec issue of separatism as well. So those points were well raised. Back again, the opposition was talking about being razzle-dazzled by the confusion, so it makes sort of making fun of the government's arguments, and again reinforcing why change. Monarchy exists to oversee the government. There's sort of a second check on what happens. The issue of decorum, if nothing else, and the fact that representation is in general, that the fact that it's a man or a woman, it doesn't matter, they represent the people generally. So in fact, there is still representation of the people through the monarch, through the Governor General, through the Prime Minister, without having to resort to being a republic for the will of the people. And that's based in the Constitution as well. So the wind-up arguments, again, opposition, Crown is guarantor of stability, shows the will of the people, and a mature government system. The government comes out, why change what apparently works? In fact, status quo doesn't work, and we've shown that it is good to have change, it enhances democracy, and the people in charge relate to Canadians and develop the Canadians want. So I think a good back and forth. Generally, the points of information were well handled, given the energy that they were done with, and I think the points were well raised. However, I'm awarding it to the opposition in the sense that, again, the fact that the president issue wasn't really brought up, and I think that there were, based on hopefully what I've explained, there were enough arguments countering the issue of stability and good government from the opposition to the government's case. So again, opposition awarded, but Margie gets Best Speaker for music.
Mr. Adjudicator. So the motion is defeated. Thank you to the adjudicator's verdict. And now we have the results from the popular vote. We had 11 ballots. 5 were in favor of the government, and 5 were in favor of the opposition. So we actually have a hung popular vote, and in these cases, the responsibility falls to the speaker to actually cast the deciding vote. Oh, this is our policy. The speaker casts the deciding vote. So I'm leaning towards going with the status quo and awarding it to the government. At the same time, knowing that the status quo is itself opposed to its own status quo. So I'm going to cut myself short and give this to the government for the popular vote. So thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You voted to change it.